Hi everyone, it's Reba. Welcome to my channel. Today I am doing the long-awaited second installment to my Reading New Weird series. I made an initial video for this series and you should go and watch that if you haven't yet. In my first video, I do an intro and overview to the New Weird, and I break down a couple of articles which I will link again in this video description, but this is the follow-up to that first video, and I'm going to start discussing the books that I read for New Weird. The three books I read were Bloodchild, a short story collection by Octavia Butler. Then I read Borne by VanderMeer, and then Oval by Elvia Wilk. When it comes to New Weird, and specifically the two articles I used to help me understand what I'm looking for when I read New Weird, I condensed some of the ideas and concepts from the last video into three major points. And then I'm going to use those as I discuss the three books and hopefully give you a good idea of what the guiding characteristics are in New Weird and how they're expressed in these books I've read. There's a lot to talk about. I'm very excited. I've been very much embracing New Weird. I've got my notes in front of me, so let's jump in and enjoy. The first characteristic of New Weird that I want to focus on will be subversion of reality that exposes how weird reality already is. Second is outside space that lies beyond standard understanding. And then the third characteristic is eeriness. All three of these concepts I distilled down from the two articles I read, especially Elvia Wilk's article on a theory towards the new weird. So yeah, let's dive into the books. I'll give you a brief description of what each one was about and then discuss it in its relation to and representation of these characteristics of New Weird. Okay, again, the first book I read was Bloodchild by Octavia Butler, and I think this was a fantastic introduction to Octavia Butler if you haven't read her yet. It's a collection of short stories, and following each short story, she includes an afterword, mostly talking about how she came up with the idea and for the story. This edition also includes a couple of essays she wrote about writing. In the preface, Butler wrote, "The truth is, I hate short story writing. Trying to do it has taught me much more about frustration and despair than I ever wanted to know." She then spoke about struggling to find her place in the writing world, since she wrote a lot of stories in the sci-fi and fantasy genres. Editors, college writing teachers didn't really appreciate those genres, and she got a lot of rejections. Eventually, she would be able to make some of her short story concepts work as novels, and those are what she's most known for. Butler wrote that the ideas that most interest me tend to be big. Exploring them takes more time and space than a short story can contain. All that being said, I thought her short stories were brilliant. I wrote in a review of this book that they are some of the most imaginative short stories that I've ever read. The way she thinks and the way her brain works just is so incredible. All of the stories in this book explore science fiction and speculative fiction concepts, including themes like humans and aliens coexisting. There's a couple of stories including fictional genetic disorders and viruses that humanity has to grapple with. There's a hallucination story and a story that asks the question, what if you were confronted by God to make one change to save humanity? All of these stories involve themes that I found in Butler's other writing, things like community as a cornerstone of survival, biological predisposition, and the human experience of suffering and destruction. I previously have just read the Parable series, and I found all of those to be consistent themes in both the Parable series as well as the stories here. I really enjoyed reading all of the afterwords that followed each story, because you'd read the most mind-boggling, wildest short story, and then come to the afterword, which felt so grounded and commonplace, or down to earth, I guess would be the better phrase for it. Her stories are so profound. You read them and you think Octavia Butler must be this otherworldly person whose understanding is so beyond anything or any way I comprehend the world. Although I still think that's true, her afterwards show this other side of her, which is a very grounded and relatable person. Many of the afterwards talk about how this story was a way of her processing a fear she had, or she was on a bus one day and an idea came to her and she followed it and made this story from that idea. She's very honest and generous and doesn't appear to want to mystify what being a writer is and what writing is like. Reading this made me like her even more, because you can tell she's highly intelligent, and also a very compassionate and thoughtful person. If you want to be presented with some difficult ideas to think about, you should read Butler. Her characters deal with very difficult scenarios and make nuanced decisions. These are not your typical alien invasion stories. There are no good versus evil tropes, no simple ethical and moral decisions. For this video, I want to focus just on the title story of Bloodchild, although I do find there are elements of new weird throughout all those stories in this collection. There are a couple of unique words in this story, because Octavia Butler has created like an alien species and come up with different like ways that they name the aliens. And so I'm unsure exactly how to pronounce them. I will pronounce them the way I did in my head, and I will put the spelling of the word in the video so you can see what I'm saying, or what I read and how I'm saying it. Bloodchild centers on a family that lives in a human colony on another planet inhabited by an alien species called Tlick. The Tlick provide protection to the humans, and in exchange, a child from each human family has to become a vessel for the impregnation of a Tlick. In Bloodchild, a young man named Gan has been chosen as the host for a Tlick named Tegatoy. Tegatoy will impregnate Gan with her larvae. The Tlick are insect-like and use human bodies to implant their larvae. Butler was inspired by her fear of botflies, which lay their eggs in human wounds that came from other insect bites. Tegatoy is the Tlick individual that cares for Gan's family. Gan is biologically male and Tegatoy is female, which is an interesting reversal of roles that Butler wanted to specifically explore in this story. Of the three characteristics of New Weird that I've condensed, I want to focus on the subversion of reality in this story. The Tlick, using the human host bodies to carry their eggs, examines this concept of pregnancy, but this time it's between species. This made me think about how strange pregnancy is in general and how it's become this very natural, accepted part of our culture, but is actually quite a wild and weird experience. Your body physically changes and adapts to another being inside of it that's growing and feeding off of your body's nutrients. In Bloodchild, Gan sees how dangerous the process can be to carry the Tlick larvae. There's also a risk and danger in human pregnancies, but this experience is so accepted and quintessential to our society that the danger becomes diminished by the expectation. Butler's creation of a scenario in which a boy child is impregnated by an insect-like alien causes the reader to examine the strangeness of the human pregnancy we are accustomed to and invites so many questions about the politics around it. In reality, there are bodies that can become pregnant, and those bodies undergo an intense transformation to carry and nurture an embryo into a human baby. This is such a wild, strange, and incredible experience the human body can have. I hadn't thought about how weird and strange it was until reading this story and being confronted with a subversion of a pregnancy in this way. In the story, it's essential that a child from the families that the Tlit care for make this sacrifice to allow their bodies to become impregnated with the alien larvae. This ensures that the family continues to have the protection of the Tlick per an agreement between the two species. I interpreted this as another subversion of reality, which is this biblical idea of humans having dominion over other animals and the natural world. I also think humans have a fear of losing this assumed dominion and power. I'm generalizing here, but I do see that humans use animals to our benefit. We breed them and we use them in a way that disregards their agency and choice at times. A common theme that I've seen in sci-fi is this fear of invasion of another species that is more intelligent or more powerful than humans. My theory is that humans fear losing this power that we assume we have over the species of our Earth, and that we assume that the cruelest parts of human nature could be enacted on us. We've treated animals with indifference, we've treated humans like animals, and we know the worst we're capable of, so of course we'd assume that another species would try to colonize and eradicate us just the same. This story explores the idea of humans having to make a trade with another species in order to survive and to preserve their own kind. Although Butler said that this isn't a story about slavery, I cannot help but see this imbalance of power here with the aliens abusing their power over humans. But then I question if this is just how I've been conditioned to view a relationship between humans and aliens. And I think Octavia Butler is trying to push us past these traditional ideas and themes and make us try to imagine what it would be like for humans to coexist with aliens or another species in this contractual relationship. Beyond the binary of good humans versus bad aliens, Butler is forcing us to question this idea of what would happen if we tried to live together. New Weird can so brilliantly show us how strange and weird our reality is by subverting our expectations. In Bloodchild, aliens impregnate humans. Humans submit some of their assumed dominion and power. And by doing this, Butler forces us to examine how strange pregnancy really is and confront our ideas around the domination of species. If you've read this, let me know what you thought. I'd love to hear other people's theories or other elements of the new weird that they picked up with this book. If you haven't read this story or this book in general, I highly recommend it, especially if you're curious and want to read some weird stuff that's very challenging to our typical perceptions. The next book I read was Borne by Jeff VanderMeer. I had a fantastic time reading this one, and I'm really excited to continue reading more in this universe. Borne is a story told from the perspective of Rachel, a scavenger in this post-apocalyptic city that was once the headquarters of a powerful biotech firm called The Company. Out scavenging one day, Rachel discovers a mysterious blob-like organism and brings it home. Unclear at first whether it is plant or animal, the thing eventually exposes that it has consciousness, and Rachel identifies it as a he/him, and she names him Borne. She develops a mothering relationship with Borne, and the mysteriousness of his purpose creates a tension between her and her partner Wilk. Borne gains intelligence and independence that threatens the city's future, as well as Rachel's perception of Borne. This was very exciting and compulsive to read. I felt so immersed in the world, and I thought the writing and the themes were really fantastic. Like I said, I'm really excited to continue reading in this universe. I don't think VanderMeer has written specific sequels with the same characters, but I know that there are at least 2 other books or stories that happen in the same universe, but with different characters. There's The Strange Bird and Dead Astronauts, both of which I will definitely be reading in the future. With Borne, I want to focus on the characteristic of outside space, or the space that lies beyond our understanding. In reading Borne, I saw the characteristic of outside space through both the characters as well as the environment. Both the characters and environment of this universe of Borne live in this blurred line between natural and artificial, a liminal space between these 2 states of being. Just like in Bloodchild, with its subversion of reality, this blurred line between natural and artificial made me keenly aware of how we enforce a distinction between natural and artificial in our reality. Let me get into a couple of examples to show you what I mean. First, Borne, like I said, was this unidentifiable organism. At first, Rachel thinks he might be a plant, and then decides that maybe he's an animal because he can move on his own. Soon enough, she finds that Borne can speak and shapeshift into different appearances. The more he learns and consumes, the more he's able to adapt cognitively and also physically. Unlike a human body, Borne's has very little limitations. He was all the things he could be. Rough in places, smooth in others, bumpy and sandpapery in one area, and as worn as river stone in another. Borne is this artificially engineered creature that can shapeshift and morph into any form that he wants. He wasn't born from a parental plant or animal, and yet still has this very natural desire to connect and to be a person. At one point in the book, he and Rachel discuss personhood, and it brings up some interesting questions around what it means to be a person and who's allowed to be one. Rachel tells Borne that he is a person and that every person has a purpose. The main mystery unfolding within the story is finding out what Borne's purpose is. The outside space in this context is the fact that there exists a biotechnical organism that becomes sentient and is accepted as a person by a natural-born human. Borne was created artificially, but exists and grows very organically. He is both artificial and natural. Meanwhile, a common theme in our reality is that things are and things are not. We fixate on things being natural or unnatural. The outside space of Borne questions the inside space of our reality, which dictates who gets to be a person, what type of person is acceptable, and what bodies get to be loved. Beyond Borne, other beings in this story exist both naturally and artificially. The youth of the city trade in their own body parts for biotech enhancements like wasps for eyes and claws for hands. There's even this large flying bear named Mord that at one point used to be human. Even the environment morphs between the organic and the built. Rachel and Wilk live in a place called the Balcony Cliffs. It's a series of corridors and rooms that they've secured through secret routes and traps. At one point, it's described as having a former lobby and also balconies, which are both architectural or built elements. But Rachel also refers to it as a warren, which means a series of interconnected rabbit burrows. I interpreted the landscape of this book to feel like nature was eroding and taking over a destroyed city that was once this artificially built environment. Dust and sand cover the streets. Buildings are crumbled and they've become these mounds of rubble. The line between biotech and natural wildlife is also blurred in this universe. What's organic and what comes from inside the company meld and blend together, and so you cannot distinguish between the two. I don't want to give away or spoil the rest of the plot, so I'm not going to talk about what else happens in the book. And this is because I really want you to read it for yourself and enter this outside space that is Borne. Immerse yourself in this weird world of the Borne universe that is both natural and artificial, and contemplate what it means to be a person regardless of how you came into existence. If you've already read this, please let me know in the comments what you thought and what elements of the new weird stood out to you in this book. The final book I read for this video was Oval by Elvia Wilk. Taking place in a near future alternative Berlin, Oval centers on Anya, a scientist who works for a company whose entire purpose is to do research for the sake of discovery. She lives with her boyfriend Louis in an experimental eco-conscious community on an artificial mountain located in the middle of Berlin. The people that live in the experimental community notice that the infrastructure of the house starts to fail, and it feels impossible to keep up with the sustainability lifestyle that the house requires. Louis works as an art consultant for another research-based corporation. He comes up with an idea for a drug in the form of a pill, and this is where the name of the book comes from, as he names the drug Oval. He believes it will solve the income inequality of Berlin by stimulating generosity in the brain of the person that takes it. He believes that the wealth of the city would be distributed and capitalism eradicated by the rich getting high on this drug. Anya suspiciously gets promoted to a new position with no explanation, and it leads her to question the motives of the company she works for. While all this is going on, Anya is also trying to navigate her relationship with Louis, as his mother recently has passed. She doesn't understand how he can be so calm and stoic in the wake of grief, and their relationship starts to deteriorate when they are unable to communicate. Their eco house begins to fail and malfunction, and things start happening to Anya's body that mirror the house's changes. There is also an ongoing relationship between Anya and her best friends, who are facing serious financial trouble and are in danger of losing their apartment. Anya debates her responsibility in helping them and interrogates her own hesitations toward generosity. If that sounds like too many things happening, it's because it was. My biggest critique of this book was just that Wilk tried to do too many things, and it resulted in this very unfocused plot. There's a lot going on, there's a lot to pick apart, but I will focus on one main concept of New Weird, which is eeriness. What I found most eerie about Oval was how uncanny this book felt. It was like looking into a mirror of reality, but everything feels slightly off. Just like in Bloodchild, there is this subversion of reality that makes you aware of how weird your reality actually is. In Oval, she tweaks and exaggerates a few elements that don't feel quite too far off from where we're actually at. Because the book is set in the near future, you get this sense of, yep, this is exactly where we're headed. There's something beyond the inevitability of this story that creates a sense of eeriness. It's this fact that when you read about an organization or a character in the story, you think it seems so far-fetched and outrageous. But if you take a step back, you realize that it's not that much of an exaggeration to the current systems that we exist in. And that's what's like so eerie about reading Oval. For example, in one scene, Anya attends this industry party and she discovers these like shrunken heads that are like displayed as art. We learn that these shrunken heads were the actual heads of some art consultants that these big investors own, because the art consultants had signed a contract with these investment companies but died before the contract was up. So the investors literally own their heads. That may seem ridiculous, but if you zoom out, it feels like a more literal exaggeration of corporations owning the intellectual property of their employees. Right now, there are corporations that exploit creative output from their employees and then use that creative output for their own profit. Like Borne, Oval also includes a blend of the natural and the artificial. Wilk references this in her article when she talks about Anya's physical changes in her own body that are eerily linked to her house's malfunctions. This is one of the other themes that I think gets lost in all the other things happening. I was less interested in how Anya's body was reacting to the changes of the house, and more interested in thinking about how the house only seemed to work if the residents could conform to the waste minimization that was required to live there. It made me think about how we try to implement climate change initiatives, but the way that our society consumes and generates waste, all of those habits we've come to have make it really difficult or seem impossible to comply with these green initiatives. The approach of asking individuals to just change their habits is only a small piece in this larger problem seated in the way our society operates. Our current system really needs a huge overhaul to really benefit from changes in sustainability. Some of the same arguments can be made regarding Lewis's pill, his drug Oval that he creates. The question becomes, is an artificial state of generosity actually going to solve an inequality problem? It seems to me that the real problem we need to solve for is how the majority of the global wealth becomes owned by a small group of the population, not how do we incentivize them to share the wealth once they've owned it all. The use of new weird in this book allows us to examine our own reality through an eerie and uncanny near future. Ultimately, this book felt like a simulation of what our world will become if we keep just applying band-aids to our societal problems. Thought-provoking, yes, but I do just wish that the book had been a little more focused and tried to do less. Again, let me know what you think. If you've also read this book, I'd love to know what other people's thoughts and interpretation of the different themes were. I've really enjoyed being immersed in the new weird and want to continue reading it. So I have picked out a couple of other books that I'd like to read in the next installment of this series. But please, let me know in the comments if there are other books that you think I should be reading and that I should add to my list. So for the next video, I do want to read The Cipher by Kathe Koja. All I know about this one is that there is a character that has a hole in his hand that's like weeping tears. That's all I know, so we'll see. And then I do want to read a China Mieville book. I've picked out The City and the City, which sounds like it's a murder mystery noir type book, which sounds really fun. So I think I'll read those two for the next video, and then I do want to do one other video where I read the Southern Reach trilogy by VanderMeer. I'm like super into VanderMeer now after reading Borne. Before I let you go, I just want to shout out a couple of other books and a podcast, because as I've been reading The New Weird and like consumed with looking for the themes and concepts and guiding like characteristics of New Weird, I feel like I've started to identify the elements of it in some of the other books that I've been reading. So I do want to call out the book The Employees by Olga Ravn, as well as the short story collection Bliss Montage by Ling. I think both of those have elements of the New Weird, and if you've read them and you agree with me, let me know. Otherwise, I think they're both fantastic books and I highly recommend them. And then finally, for a podcast, I've been really enjoying listening to this podcast called Imaginary Advice. And I think it also just really draws on certain elements of the New Weird. The creator, Ross Sutherland, he like writes these really eerie and unsettling audio fiction episodes. I particularly liked his Golden House puzzle series. It's like broadcasts, and each broadcast contains like a coded message that you're supposed to piece together. So I don't know, they're really weird, really inventive, and I think they're great, and I highly recommend that podcast. Okay, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Look out for another New Weird video in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.